There is frequently heard a loud noise like thunder, which makes the earth tremble. They state that they seldom go there because their children cannot sleep, and conceive it possessed of spirits who are averse that men should be near them. William Clark of the Lewis and Clark expedition, which passed just north of Yellowstone in 1806, related an Indian's narrative of a land of wonder. However, white men were not yet ready to believe the Indians' depiction of this haunted place, preferring to wait for an observation from one of their own kind. In 1807, John Coulter, a veteran of the Lewis and Clark expedition, was the first white man to enter the area, traveling alone as fur trader to the Indians. He left no written record of his impressions, but years later, Washington Irving wrote of Coulter's Hell, a volcanic tract with its gloomy terrors, its hidden fires, smoking pots, noxious streams, and the all-pervading smell of brimstone. The name Coulter's Hell came to be applied to the great hydrothermal basin in Yellowstone. The region held a fortune in beaver skins, and from 1807 to 1840, fur trappers explored the land. Having little else for entertainment but talk, they were the finest of storytellers. Returning to the settlements, the trappers gave descriptive accounts of their ventures to a largely disbelieving audience. Joseph Meek, one of the best known of the early trappers, expressed his amazement. And behold, the whole country beyond was smoking with vapor from boiling springs and burning with gases issuing from small craters, each of which was emitting a sharp, whistling sound. In 1827, a letter from a trapper was the first published description of the area. It resembles that of a mush pot and throws its particles to immense height. The clay is white and pink. There is also a number of places where the pure sulfur is sent forth in abundance. One of our men visited one of these whilst taking his recreation. There, at an instant, made his escape when an explosion took place resembling that of thunder. Famed mountain man and guide Jim Bridger was a notorious yarn spinner, and tradition links his name with many of Yellowstone's tall tales. His lucid and truthful descriptions of the place where hell bubbled up were labeled as patent lies by a public that had come to regard the trapper's stories as wild fabrications of minds too long removed from civilization. Angered and disgusted by the suspicions cast on his honesty, he retaliated, as did so many of the other mountain men, concocting the most preposterous stories his imagination could conjure up. However, a seed of curiosity had been planted, and others were impelled to take a look for themselves. An American fur company clerk, Warren Ferris, and two Indian companions were the first tourists venturing into the upper Yellowstone country, with no other purpose than to see for themselves the truth of the wild tales told by the trappers. When dawn broke over the upper Geyser Basin, Ferris looked out on an unforgettable scene. From the surface of a rocky plain burst forth columns of water of various dimensions, projected high into the air. accompanied by loud explosions and sulfurous vapors. The largest of these wonderful fountains projects a column of boiling water several feet in diameter, to the height of more than 150 feet, accompanied by a tremendous noise. I ventured near enough to put my hand into the water of its basin, but withdrew it instantly, for the heat of the water in this immense cauldron was altogether too great for comfort. The agitation of the water and the hollow, unearthly rumbling under the rock on which I stood so ill accorded with my notions of personal safety that I retreated back precipitately to a respectful distance. The Indians with Ferris were quite appalled, thinking it unwise to trifle with the supernatural. One of them remarked that hell, of which he had heard from the whites, must be in that vicinity. The three tourists hastily concluded their excursion and went back to earning a living in the fur trade. In view of the public at large, Yellowstone was not really discovered until explored by formal expeditions. But it was not until after the dark days of the Civil War that the region was successfully penetrated. When Yellowstone entered into its greatest period of history, that of a wilderness preserved, it would be almost a half a century of trial and error before the total concept of what a national park should be would evolve. Initially, the land and its wildlife had no protection from the onslaught of pillagers. Vast reaches were unapproachable by the public, to whom it was dedicated, except by the hardiest traveler. The park was first administered by a series of 5 superintendents. However, as individuals, they were unable to adequately protect and maintain it. Striving to find the proper course in a new enterprise, the government turned the care of the park over to the military in 1886. Military protection and the improvements made under the Corps of Engineers proved to be of great benefit. However, the Department of Interior felt the need for an organization to assume control and to direct policies of management. In 1916, the National Park Service was created by an act of Congress and signed by President Woodrow Wilson. Many of the soldiers resigned from the Army and received appointments as rangers, an active protection force in the park. Since its conception, a wide range of knowledge of conservation and ecology, new understanding and sophisticated views of wildlife and forest management has been brought to the National Park Service. Courses of physical development have been charted, minimizing the impact of a large number of visitors on the environment, while allowing them the maximum benefit of enjoyment. Yellowstone was given birth in the fires of thundering volcanoes, eras of volcanism so violent as to be unparalleled in geologic history. Almost 2 billion years ago, forces deep within the earth stirred. Vast layers of metamorphic rock of gneiss and schist and sedimentary formations began to warp and buckle. Mountain ranges were uplifted by the fracturing of the Earth's crust. 20 million years later, the forces relaxed. But the gigantic crustal disturbances had given rise to another force deep within the Earth, intense volcanic activity. Molten rock surged to the surface. Sometimes the eruptions were quiet, the lava welling up, overflowing, and cascading down the sides of the volcano. At times, they were violently explosive, and mountains that would one day be called the Absaroka, Washburn, and Gallatin Ranges were made massive by the accumulated debris. Great tensional forces pulled the region apart and partially broke it into large blocks. Some blocks sank, and others rose along the fault zones, creating steep-sided mountains and canyonlands. The most spectacular of these was the Teton Fault. The vertical displacement is estimated to have totaled approximately 18,000 feet. But erosion has worn down the fault block so that only 7,000 is visible today. "600,000 years ago, hot volcanic ash and pumice spewed from giant fractures in the Earth's crust, covering hundreds of square miles in minutes. A great smoldering 1,000 square miles pit appeared in the central Yellowstone region. The ground had fallen into the enormous underground cavern that was left by the eruptions. The caldera-forming explosion is estimated to have been 200 times greater than that of Krakatoa in 1883, which was heard as far away as Australia, a distance of 3,000 miles. Once a land covered almost entirely by mountains, nearly 1/3 of the total park area is now characterized by low rolling plateaus, the floor of the ancient crater. Heat from the enormous reservoir of magma still remains within the Earth, sustaining the spectacular hot water and steam phenomena for which Yellowstone is so famous. The snows came and stayed. Sheets of ice formed in the bitter cold that lay upon the surface of the land. Yellowstone was glaciated at least 3 times, but only in the last 100,000 years have the exterior forces of water and ice had a free hand in shaping the landscape. From the ice ages came Yellowstone Lake, formed by the melting of glaciers that had blanketed the land. The melting snows of the Absaroka Range replenished the lake. Lying 7,731 feet above sea level, it is the largest body of water in the park, an inland sea covering 139 square miles. The icy, transparent waters of the lake have many moods which change with the calm and storm, sometimes dancing in joyous freedom and sparkling in the sun, sometimes chill and remote. The curiosities of this mysterious world are almost eclipsed by the sudden transformation when you step out to the abrupt rim of the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. At the head of the 20-mile-long canyon, the Yellowstone River glides uneasily out of a dark tunnel of brooding pines, curls lazily, and drops more than 300 feet. The lower falls, twice as high as Niagara, plunge into the narrow depths of the canyon, as if to cool the infernal region below the earth. The massive cliffs and the brink of the lower falls were formed by the leading edge of a lava flow. The hard, dense lava has resisted erosion, unlike the softer volcanic glass lava immediately downstream. The erosive power of running water is well illustrated here, for water that drained from Yellowstone Lake helped carve the deep 1,500 to 4,000 foot wide chasm. Perhaps typical of the myriad marvels of Yellowstone, this canyon is unlike other grand canyons in the world. It lies wide open to the viewer. There are no hidden valleys, no mysterious and muted ways tempting the explorer to the unknown. Its shadows are in the lowering sun and those cast by an angular dying tree, its twisted roots clinging tenaciously to eroding life. This part of the canyon overlies one of the wide ring fracture zones of the Yellowstone caldera. Its steep 1,500-foot deep walls of crumbling rhyolite lava, made soft by hot water and gases filtering through, are an artist's palette of brilliant hues. Very little change has occurred in the appearance of the canyon since the melting of the glaciers 10,000 years ago. Little Isa Lake, famous for its anomaly of beautiful golden water lilies, lies across the 8,262-foot crest of the Continental Divide. Its waters drain into both oceans, the Atlantic by way of the Mississippi and the Pacific by way of the Columbia River. Anxious to reach the settlements of the Madison Valley, the Washburn-Langford-Doane expedition started on horseback into the Firehole Valley. They were astonished to see at no great distance an immense volume of clear, sparkling water projected into the air to the height of 125 feet. Geysers, geysers, exclaimed one of the company, and spurring their jaded horses, they soon gathered around an unexpected phenomenon, a perfect geyser. It spouted 9 times during the explorers' stay. They gave it the name of Old Faithful. pronounced symmetry and gracefulness of form, Old Faithful has become the symbol of Yellowstone and is the focal point of most visitors. Shades of a bygone era linger at the historic Old Faithful Inn. The inn, as unique as the wonderland in which it stands, was constructed in the winter of 1903-1904. Massive tree trunks, rough boulders, and gnarled, twisted branches were skillfully fitted together to form this most striking product of the wilderness. Yellowstone's geysers are fueled by pools of magma, lying only 1 8/10 to 3 miles below the Earth's surface. They are tremendous sources of heat, sufficient to raise large quantities of water to high temperatures. The heat supplied to Yellowstone's hot springs is enough to melt 1 million tons of ice per day. The mechanism of a geyser eruption begins when the cool underground water in the fractures and vents below the Earth's surface flows into the geyser's partly emptied tubes and chambers. The water is heated to the boiling point of 212 degrees. Gas bubbles grow in size and number, clogging certain parts of the geyser tube. Steam expands, forcing the overflow of cooler water onto the surface. A preliminary spurt relieves the pressure and starts a chain reaction deeper in the system. The superheated water flashes into steam, and the geyser surges into full eruption. When most of the steam has been ejected, the geyser ceases to play. Water again enters the geyser's channels, and the cycle starts anew. The word geyser is Icelandic in origin and means to gush forth. In Iceland, it is pronounced geyser, and in England, geyser. The most conspicuous surface feature of a geyser basin are the raised siliceous sinter cones for which geysers discharge steam and water during eruption. The silica or geyserite is sometimes deposited in lace-like sheets, sometimes built up into bulbous masses. Each is unique, all are strangely beautiful. Castle Geyser's cone of sinter is believed to be the largest and oldest in the park. Its upper part is formed by the vigorous eruptions characteristic of geysers. Its lower has well-defined layers, probably deposited by hot springs. The underground water, when heated, picks up chemicals which are not readily soluble at ordinary temperatures. Silicon dioxide and bicarbonate of chloride are odorless. The unpleasant smell of brimstone, so often described by the early explorers, results from odoriferous mineral and gas compounds, such as sulfur, iron, and boron. Gases, carbon dioxide, hydrogen, and methane are found in most of the waters. Carbon dioxide accounts for the bubbles found in thermal pools. Stark and desolate, these lifeless sentinels stand as a mute testimony to the encroachment of lethal waters. Inundated with the runoff waters of a hot spring or geyser, the silica-impregnated trunk base, thus petrified, may stand for decades as whitened skeletons. Non-eruptive thermal pools are not always as spectacular as geyser eruptions, but dissolved minerals deposited by the water give them a rich coloration. Under an apparently hard crust, boiling water may be dangerously near the surface. Brilliantly green, delicately blue, bejeweled by the bright red, yellow, and orange patches of algae, the living organisms that can thrive in its environment, hot springs are magnificently beautiful and often deadly. The coloration of a hot spring channel is due to the kinds and amounts of organisms present. In very hot water, the algae are palest yellow, growing progressively darker as the water flows away and cools. The organisms living in these hot waters are so perfectly adapted that they are found in no other environment. Excelsior Geyser has not erupted since 1888. From its gigantic crater, almost 6 million gallons of 200-degree water cascade daily through its colorful channels into the Firehole River. To climb the path into the white mist on a wintry day is to seem to enter the sphere of the underworld. The churning water is heard through the mist that does not muffle its ominous sound. Glimpsed through the patches of drifting steam is the boiling water near, almost too near it seems. Its perimeters are stained with the vivid hues of the heat from its origins. Underneath the feet is the reassuring firmness of the boardwalk, and under the hand, the steadiness of its wooden rail. The phantoms that pass by out of the steam are reassuringly human. Later, emerging from the warm dampness into the more prosaic world, the air is chill. Amid that which is bizarre and fantastic are the mud pots, called mush pots by the trappers. There is almost a comforting resemblance to that pot of porridge simmering on a stove. Water in short supply is thoroughly mixed with clay and other colorful undissolved minerals such as sulfur and iron oxides, resulting in the name paint pots. Gases, steam, carbon dioxide, and hydrogen sulfide rush from the earth through a fumarole's vent. Water, seeping down to the zone of hot rock, flashes into steam upon contact with the rock. The sudden increase in volume, nearly 2,000 times, produces the pressure which drives the gases from the vent. Boardwalks crisscross the perilous steaming earth at Norris Geyser Basin like adhesive tape holding together the thin cover over a subterranean hell. This is the hottest and most active geyser basin in Yellowstone. Here, geysers and hot springs exhibit greater change in activity over a short span of time than elsewhere in the park. It is not unusual for a change in thermal features to take place overnight. The new feature may last for a few days, perhaps a month, or several years. Hot water is the life of the Mammoth Hot Springs terraces. They are built of white travertine, a limestone that has been dissolved in hot carbonic acid and forced up through the rocks by thermal pressure. Once exposed to the open air, the acidity is reduced by the carbon dioxide escaping from the solution, and the lime is deposited as travertine. It is estimated that more than 2 tons of dissolved limestone is carried to the ground surface each day by the Mammoth Hot Springs water. Deposits of travertine may extend to a depth of 250 feet. The center around a geyser basin, in comparison, is only 10 feet or less. Jupiter and Minerva Springs flow freely, creating the ornate travertine formations. Wherever hot water glistens on its surface, the formation is brilliantly colored from the great number of tiny living bacteria and algae. These remarkable springs are noted not only for their striking beauty, but their changeability. Deposition is rapid, and unpredictable shifts in water flow occurs from day to day. When a pool overflows or an edge breaks, the water runs down and begins to form a lower terrace. Should the flow of hot water cease, the terrace growth will stop, the formations turn gray and black, and begin to crumble away. The terraces, once described as a mountain turned inside out, are the largest in the world. The land is still young geologically. Soil development is shallow, and pioneer plants are common. Fire and water, in the form of thermal heat, rain and snow, still dominate the landscape. Although thousands of years have passed since Yellowstone's violent birth, mighty forces still stir just below the surface. In the Grand Teton National Park, only 5 miles away from Yellowstone, is a gentle valley. It is rich with green pastures, reflecting blue waters, and in autumn, colorful foliage. But this wealth of pastoral beauty pays obeisance at the feet of the jagged gray spires that leap and soar to capture and hold the eye. Such awesome peaks, composed of the gneiss and schist from the Earth's very foundations, should be stolid, immovable. Instead, as if possessing a life of their own, they are transmutable, changing their appearance with the time of day and from every viewpoint. The range, only 40 miles long, has over 20 peaks at least 10,000 feet high. The highest is Grand Teton at 13,766 feet. In the shadows of the highest crags are snows that never melt, remnants of glaciers from the last ice age. The range is unique in that it rises abruptly from the valley floor. There are no foothills whatsoever. The Tetons received their name from early French-Canadian trappers. Approaching from the west and sighting the 3 sharp, snowy peaks, they gave them the name of Grand Tetons, 3 breasts, which was adopted by the trapping fraternity. The massive bison, or buffalo, which are among the last purely wild, free-ranging herds in the country, is one of the remnant groups of the former tens of millions. After the turn of the century, there were less than 50 buffalo harbored in Yellowstone. To prevent inbreeding and extinction, the National Park Service brought in buffalo from Texas and Montana, where ranchers were trying to domesticate them. Their efforts succeeded, and survival of the species was assured. One of Yellowstone's greatest thrills is to watch a bear in spring roaming the valley bottoms. No sight elicits more comment or use of film than a mother bear with cubs. These seemingly cuddly clowns of the woods are unpredictable and dangerous, as are all wild animals. Injury and even death have come from encounters between man and bear, for this symbol of American wilderness has lost its fear of man. Never fail to give these powerful animals their due respect. Park regulations prohibiting feeding and molesting of all animals are strictly enforced. Here, man is a visitor, but Yellowstone is their home. 2 kinds of bears reside in the wilds of the park: black bears, probably the best known animal, and the grizzly. These 2 species, more than any other wildlife, epitomize the dilemma of coexistence of man with beast. The grizzly, the largest and most formidable, is distinguished by the heavy build with a pronounced hump at the shoulders. In spite of his size, he can travel at tremendous speed and for a short distance outrun a horse. He is more wary of man and, fortunately, not addicted to the panhandling or clowning traits of the black bear. Although classed as a carnivore, he is actually like man, an omnivore. Only in Alaska and Western Canada are grizzlies still relatively abundant. They have been exterminated in all other areas, except for rare exceptions. The high mountains and wilderness areas of the national parks and forests of Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming now support less than 1,000. Approximately 300 reside within Yellowstone National Park boundaries. Even in the preserves of the national parks, the black bears and grizzlies are now infrequently seen. They are not in hiding. They simply are not there. Humans have proven to be a destructive force to bears. Enticed by easily accessible sources of food supply, they have over the years formed feeding habits that are sometimes impossible to break. The attempt to return the bears to their natural habitat in the wild has not always been successful. Sometimes the feeding habits cannot be broken, and the bear must be destroyed to avoid endangering human life. Others cannot adjust to reorientation and die. Others are sometimes killed illegally. Both bear and bison are symbols of what man does to our fragile planet. Extinct, they are a testimony to man's preoccupation with himself and his needs. Alive, a symbol of understanding and freedom. As the world's population increases, it becomes more obvious that we must set aside large areas of wilderness so that it and its inhabitants may survive. More than ever, as in the past, there will be the clash of interests. Those people whose self-interest opposes the idea of any type of national park or preserve, and those who realize that we have a responsibility for all forms of life on Earth. Yellowstone is not only a place of pristine beauty and uncommon features, it is our national and natural treasure, sometimes moody, sometimes awesome, but always beautiful, eternal, and mysterious, that occupies a special place in the hearts of all those who have seen it. It is an innovative concept of conservation that caught the imagination of the world after generations of apathy and abuse. Of all the benefits from Yellowstone National Park, this may be the greatest, that scores of nations have preserved areas of natural beauty and historical worth that, like Yellowstone, must endure unchanged, unspoiled, and unmolested next year, the year after, into the next century and beyond.
Unchanged, it was a dramatic ecological event, a display of one of nature's most spectacular powers that evokes a fundamental negative emotion in mankind: wildfire. Mantles of billowing thick smoke rose above raging flames, devouring a 200-year-old forest. A series of unusually high winds fanned the conflagration. Firestorms generated even more violent winds. This was the summer of 1988 in Yellowstone. The hot, rainless months of June, July, and August. The driest summer ever recorded in the park's 112-year written record. Natural fuels, accumulating on the forest floor since fire suppression began in 1886, were drying at an unprecedented rate. Since the Park Service's natural fire program was implemented in 1972, only man-made fires were being suppressed.
The National Park Service manages all fires that occur on National Park Service lands. In natural areas, in many cases, fire was an integral part and continues to be an integral part in maintaining what is natural. Sometimes fires are good. In every case, any fire that starts the National Park Service looks at that fire and evaluates it to see if there are risks that are unacceptable, for example, the damage to developed areas.
But this summer, an unusual number of fires had begun, and on July 21st, the program was suspended. All fires were subjected to full suppression efforts as manpower would allow. Backfiring is a controlled fire set to starve all the fuel from an approaching fire.
We're going to try to fight fire with fire here and use the fire's own behavior against it. If we don't get the 2 miles of black line that we're hoping to get, the buffer zone between this line and the main fire, we're just going to have to fight this fire as hard and as best as we can.
By the end of September, about 1.1 million acres in Yellowstone National Park, 50% of the park, were affected by fire. However, only about half the vegetation burned within many fire perimeters. The lodgepole pine in Yellowstone begins to seed immediately following a fire.
The lodgepole pine, the predominant tree in Yellowstone, which makes up about 80% of the forest, is a fire-adapted species. Its cones are what we call serotinous, and the heat of the fires will actually stimulate the opening of the cones and dropping of seeds, which will then regenerate the forest into more lodgepole pine.
Yellowstone's most unusual and major attraction, the hydrothermal features, remain intact and undamaged by the fires. Secondary to the threat to human life and personal possessions is people's concern for the fate of wildlife during a forest fire. The illusion that animals flee in panic-stricken terror has been disproved. The fires of Yellowstone were not an isolated event, but part of an endless process. Nature must be unfettered so that the ecosystem and landscape can be as nearly primeval as possible. It is late September, and a new green carpet is pushing through the singed turf. Nature is self-healing. Yellowstone National Park's importance is not circumscribed by a temporary situation. Its relevance is not just for this year or this generation. Its value is in its continuing integrity, extending into the misty future.